When we ended Part 2 we were in Obama's second term. He remained very popular among Democrats during his presidency. I should have mentioned this in Part 2, but in 2011 Steve Rogers was found by S.H.I.E.L.D. He was frozen in ice since before the end of World War II. They unfroze him and he was back. This ultimately led to the assembling of the Avengers in 2012. In 2016 the Democrats nominated Carol Moseley Brown. The Republicans nominated Mann, a very unknown person. And then there was Eli George, who ran as an independent. This election was a shocker. Eli George won in a landslide and almost unanimously. He received all 50 Maine states with 535 electoral votes. Carol Moseley Brown only received 3, that just being the District of Columbia, which only is the states of the Philippines and Puerto Rico, and the city of Washington, D.C. Mann did not receive any electoral votes. Robert F. Kennedy was chosen as Georgia's vice president. But about a year into their terms they both put in their resignations for unknown reasons. Then former President Barack Obama was appointed as president, who only left the presidency a little over a year earlier. And Cori Bush was appointed as vice president and became the first female vice president. In 2018 Thanos came for the Infinity Stones. Mark Superstar originally had all 6 stones but sold them to government agencies in 2014. We don't know how much he sold them for, but it was at least in the billions. Thanos got all 6 stones but Thor strikes him in the chest. Thanos then says his famous line, "You should have gone for the head." Right after he says that, he prepares to snap his fingers but a sniper shot goes off. Thanos slowly collapses and drops dead as special heavy sniper bullets were still hitting him. We then see in the distance Mark Superstar with a heavy sniper rifle. If it weren't for him and his sniper, half of all life could have been wiped out. The stones were now in full possession of the US government and were locked away. People called this the Infinity War. In 2020 the Democrats nominated John F. Kennedy, who is from another universe and not the one from the 1930s or from 1956. While the Republicans nominated Aviation Maitan. Mann was back running as a third party this time. Bryce from Texas ran as a third party too. JFA from the legendary Marple Washington family and Nicholas Marple, the former president and vice president who's served multiple times throughout history, would also run third-party campaigns. The results of this election has Kennedy winning with 280 electoral votes. Aviation Maitan received 189 electoral votes and Bryce received 69. All other candidates did not win any electoral votes. Cori Bush would also be JFK's vice president. In 2022 Russia invaded Ukraine, starting World War IV. The US would be more involved in this timeline. The Allied forces, including the US, Canada, the UK, Ukraine and France. North Korea would form an alliance with Russia to back them up. World War IV was possibly the least deadly of them all. Each country didn't have no more than 200,000 casualties each. The war only lasted 2 years, starting in February 2022 and ending in March 2024. JFK was determined to end the war before his term was up, since he announced he wasn't running for re-election. He got both Russia and North Korea to sign a treaty. JFK was a popular wartime president. He had a very solid presidency and remained very popular for the rest of his term. In 2024 the Democrats nominated Cori Bush, and the Republicans gave it another go with Aviation Maitan. This election was a classic close race, but in the end Cori Bush wins with 276 electoral votes and becoming the first female president in American history. Aviation Maitan received 262 electoral votes. Aviation eventually went crazy and he unalived himself on national television. The Pines era 2029 to 2037, in 2028 Cori Bush runs for re-election as a third party. And some old and new faces show up. Nicholas Marple was back as the Republicans' choice. The Democrats nominated former President Roland Burris, who hasn't been seen since leaving office in 1829. And then there was Stanford Pines, who ran as an independent. The results were Pines winning with 280 electoral votes. Burris finished second with 143 and Nicholas Marple received 115. Incumbent President Cori Bush did not get any electoral votes, probably due to being a very unpopular president. It was the worst defeat by an incumbent president in history. Franklin Delano Roosevelt became vice president for Pines' first term and was from another universe and is not the Franklin Roosevelt from the 20th century who killed 2 presidents. In 2029 the original James Logan Howlett died at 197. But a variant of him from another universe had already been here since 2024 and he was here to stay. He had already been alive for more than 200 fucking years.
I have never met a sadder, more attention-starved, jabbering little prick in my entire life, and that says a lot, because I've been alive for more than 200 fucking years. And I'll tell you, that bald chick was right about one thing. You will never save the world. You couldn't even save a relationship with a goddamn stripper. And motherfucker, I wish I could say you die alone. But it's one of God's best jokes that you can't die, except it's on all of us!
He and Deadpool would go on various adventures together. In 2032 it was a three-way rematch with Pines running for re-election as an independent again. Marple was nominated by the Republicans again. And Burris was back running as a third party, which meant there was no Democratic candidate this election. The results showed Pines winning re-election with 361 electoral votes. Nicholas Marple came in second this time, receiving 170, and Burris in third with 7. Pines had a very solid presidency. He remained very popular through both of his terms and is considered one of the nation's greatest presidents. JFA first reign in an almost dictatorship 2037 to 2042. In 2036, after serving 2 terms, President Pines declined to run for a third term and it was time for the next president. The Republicans nominated JFA, who ran a third-party campaign back in 2020. The Democrats were back nominating Henry Wallace, who also came here from another universe. And Jonathan Weaver ran as an independent. The results were JFA winning with 317 electoral votes. Henry Wallace finished second with 190. And Weaver finished with 31. Freddie Fazbear, the former president and vice president, would be JFA's vice president. In 2040 they were both easily renominated by the Republican Party. The Democrats nominated Amy Klobuchar and former Vice President David Winslow II, who was an ancestor of former Vice President David Winslow and Freddie Fazbear's first VP in the 90s, as her running mate. This time Amy Klobuchar wins in a landslide with 423 electoral votes and becoming the second female president. JFA finished second with 115. About a year into the Klobuchar term, Winslow stepped down as VP. James Wilson, who hasn't been seen since losing the 1904 election, made a surprise comeback and was appointed as vice president. Then the president did something horrible. She attempted to turn the country into a dictatorship and tried to make herself dictator. She was immediately kicked out of office by Congress, proving the American Reich from World War II was the one and only true American empire. James Wilson was then appointed as president. For her actions, Amy Klobuchar is considered the worst president in history. Wilson-Fazbear era 2042 to 2053. After serving the remainder of Klobuchar's term, Wilson attempts to run for a term of his own in the 2044 election and is nominated by the Democrats. The Republicans again nominate former President Nicholas Marple. Wilson is able to win his own term in a close race, with the final score being 287 to 251. In 2045 Russia would invade Ukraine again with the help of North Korea. This ultimately started World War V. The Allied powers were the same as World War IV, but Mexico joins the war this time. China and Iran would join North Korea and Russia. Mark Superstar became the only person in history to fight in all 5 world wars. This war would be much bigger than the last one. The war was escalating rapidly. In 2048 Wilson runs for re-election. Since he remained popular in the Democratic Party, he was easily renominated by the Democrats. Former President and Vice President Freddie Fazbear was nominated by the Republicans. Sharon Davis runs a third-party campaign. Freddie is able to beat incumbent James Wilson 290 to 164. Sharon Davis received 84 electoral votes. Fazbear would serve a full third non-consecutive term. He would not run for re-election. During Fazbear's third term, the Allies would gain more momentum and were starting to win the war. In 2049 a variant of George Washington from another universe would come to this universe. He would serve in the war and he became the Iron Patriot. He would later serve as Speaker of the House for a brief period of time. The 2050s and the second reign of JFA 2053 to 2057. In 2052 it was time for another president. The Democrats nominated Jonathan Weaver as he decided to run again. The Republicans nominated Ludwig von Mises, who was another variant from a different universe. Weaver won in a landslide, with it being 447 to 91. In 2054 Weaver was impeached and voted out of office. Probably because he did little to nothing about the war and the enemies were starting to make a comeback. And since Weaver never picked a vice president, JFA was appointed as president and is back in office. He would help the Allies finish the war strong. In 2055 Aviation Maitan would return and confirmed he faked his death. He then revealed his true identity. He was Galactus, the Devourer of Worlds. He would team up with the enemy nations to try and take down the United States. JFA ordered all heroes and soldiers to unite and take down Galactus and the enemy nations. In November the Allies were finally able to defeat Galactus and the enemy nations surrendered. They were all forced to sign a treaty and had to pay up to over $1 trillion for their actions that caused a lot of damage. And World War V was officially over and the Allies had won. People believe JFA's second reign as president was better than his first. 2056 election. JFA does not run for another term in 2056 and it's time for America's next president. Henry Wallace was back and was the Democratic nominee once again. The Republicans nominated Sarah Palin. And for third parties former President Freddie Fazbear runs as a third party and so does Max Quebec. The final score was a deadlock. It was the first deadlocked election since 1988. Sarah Palin received 211 electoral votes winning the Electoral College but did not receive 270. Henry Wallace finished second with 185 electoral votes. Quebec finished with 136 and Fazbear finished with 6, that being the state of Nevada. Congress had to choose between the top three candidates and Quebec narrowly won the Congress vote. Quebec only chose to serve one term but had a pretty solid presidency and was actually more popular among Democrats. In Part 4 we will start off with the 2060 election.